This series is hosted by Southeast Ocean and Coastal Acidification Network. In short, the series lays a foundation for the state of ocean acidification science in the Southeast region. These webinars are intended to create a dialogue among scientists to identify what is known, what isn't, and what research in other regions of the U.S. can be applied to better understand ocean acidification and its impacts in the Southeast U.S. With awareness of and access to the research and its applications and uses, webinar participants will be able to collaborate to better understand and adapt to ocean acidification moving forward. I'm Jen Bennett-Mintz, Education and Outreach Coordinator for NOAA's Ocean Acidification Program, and I'll be facilitating today's session on behalf of the SOCAN Steering Committee. During the presentation, all audience members will be in listen-only mode. You are welcome to type questions related to technical issues or questions for our presenter into the questions box in the bottom of the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be monitoring incoming questions and will respond to them or pose them to our speaker. We are also recording this session. The video recording and PDF of the presentation will be available on the SOCAN website. We are so pleased to have Ruairidh Morrison, the Executive Director of NERACOOS, with us today. In his role at the Northeastern Regional Association of Coastal Ocean Observing Systems, he runs one of the 11 regions of the U.S. Integrated Ocean Observing Systems, or IOS. He received his PhD from the University of Wales, Bangor in 1999, and since then has worked at the Bermuda Biological Station for Research, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and the University of New Hampshire, where he retains an affiliate faculty position. His research background is in optical oceanography, ocean color remote sensing, and observing systems. He is a member of a number of regional, national, and international organizations, including serving as the chair of the steering committee for the Northeast Coastal Acidification Network, or NECAN, which we'll be hearing about today. He is also chair of the IOS Association and co-chair of the 2012 IOS Summit, a board member of the Marine and Oceanographic Technology Network, a counselor on the Binational Gulf of Maine Council and the Marine Environment, and is a member of a water quality working group for the International Group on Earth Observations. So with that, Ruairidh, with no further ado, let's go ahead and hand the presentation over to you.
Thank you very much, Jen, and I always get embarrassed when I hear all of that lot, but anyhow, I will carry on and show my monitor, and I will then bring up this presentation. I've been on the end of this, where I've helped facilitate many webinars as part of the NECAN webinar series, but I've never done one myself, so thank you all for your patience. And I should say that NECAN is really a fantastic collaborative effort that it's been a great joy to be part of. It's really a lot of the legwork has been done by these people here as members of the NECAN Steering Committee. It was formed in September 2013 and has members from academia, industry, non-profits, and federal agencies as well, and is kind of designed probably similar to the SOCAN Steering Committee to really cut across all the communities that have a stake in this. So we're going to tell you, or I'm going to tell you, the story of NECAN today. It's not one that's finished, but it is one that has been greatly helped by Cassie Stymiest, who put many of these slides together. Cassie is currently either listening to this or presenting at the National Marine Educators Association meeting in Rhode Island, and so was unable to give this talk herself. So, how did NECAN come about? Well, I think you all know that on the West Coast there were some problems seen with dying oysters and hard-hit aquacultural industries, and the CCAN, the California Current Acidification Network, was grown and born to help address those issues. And then I think in September of 2013, this nice happy chap here, Dwight Gledhill, at an IOS Association meeting in the spring, said to me, Ru, I think we really need to do something like that for NECAN. I bet you can't do it. So NECAN was really developed on a dare, and he showed me all of these good things that was going on with ocean acidification in the Northeast. Some of the work of Joe Salisbury here and his collaboration with Bill from Mook Sea Farm. So that led to the establishment of NECAN, and we've been at this now for a couple of years. And I'm going to tell you a bit about what we've done over that time. One of the nice things is that we kind of grew out of CCAN, or that idea, and the idea of forming regional collaborations to address critical issues such as ocean and coastal acidification is a really good one. And so I was really pleased to hear that SOCAN had formed as well. So NECAN's role, one of the things that we had to do was really lay out what we would do and what we wouldn't do. And so what we decided that NECAN's role is really to review and assess the most recent scientific and socioeconomic information, really around economically important marine organisms, to communicate that state of knowledge and the critical gaps in that knowledge to relevant state and federal agencies, to help coordinate and set regional priorities, and also to respond to user and stakeholder needs. And to do that, we've come up with a process. So it's probably very similar to what's happening with SOCAN. We started off with 16 webinars. We then did some synthesis of that, including having a state of the science workshop. We produced a summary article that it was part of a recent oceanography special edition, and we've been working to communicate with people about this, having stakeholder engagement workshops to get input, and also we'll be setting regional priorities in an implementation plan. So the first thing we did, as I said, was this 16 presentations by webinar. We then had a State of the Science workshop in April 2014, and then really, which brought together about 40 scientists and investigators at the Seacoast Science Center in Rye, New Hampshire. And the kind of consensus coming out of that is the Northeast has some unique issues. The shell-forming species are very important to the region's economy. The larvae are vulnerable to ocean acidification, but we do not know enough really about species and ecosystem response to ocean and coastal acidification. And I should say really to start with, and I should have said this earlier, is I'm not really an ocean and coastal acidification expert. I'm just somebody who has the joy of bringing people together to help discuss this. So if we get technical questions at the end, I may defer them on to people who know more about this than me, such as the 16 people that were kind enough to present on the webinar series. And I think that we all know the drivers behind ocean and coastal acidification. We have the global scale processes with all of the increase in carbon dioxide in the air. Kind of this was brought home to us by, this is 10 billion tons of CO2, which is equivalent to 121 million railroad hopper cars of coal. You know, it's distributed between the atmosphere, the land, the ocean, and what the ocean is getting is something like 31 million truckloads of coal. And that has been seen, as everybody knows, in this increase in the atmosphere, and this is the iconic figure showing what's happening at the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii. And then we also spend some time going through what this all means in terms of ocean chemistry and the bits that people need to understand, and trying to make it in ways that they can understand why it's important. So linking it into the carbonate ion and why that is important for calcium carbonate and for species. And then trying to pull that together into again some pieces to let people know what's going on and other pieces. What happens with elevated CO2 levels in the red boxes and lower CO2 levels in the green boxes. I'm not going to go through all of that because I'm sure that's been covered in a lot of the other webinars. So we know that that increasing CO2 in the atmosphere is also changing what we're seeing in seawater chemistry, what we're seeing. So we're seeing increasing levels of carbon dioxide at a lot of these different time series around the world. We're seeing decreases in pH at these time series, and we're seeing decreases in the availability of the carbonate ion. But the other bit that we have compared to those global time series is, which are often in offshore waters that aren't affected by the coast, is we are, both NECAN and SOCAN are in areas that are affected by coastal processes, such as stormwater runoff, point source pollution, erosion, river inputs, and also then upwelled water from the deep ocean. And nutrients are can be a particular problem because they can cause a phytoplankton bloom, which can then sink down to the bottom and be consumed by bacteria, resulting in carbon dioxide levels that are well beyond what is expected to happen at the end of this century. So the other piece is that there are not one single stressor in these environments. There are multiple stressors. So there's acidification, thermal stress, hypoxia, suboptimum food, harmful algae, and a number of different factors that are important in coastal waters. So there are some factors in the NECAN region that make it more sensitive to acidification. So we have a number of different freshwater inputs and sources of freshwater. The currents into the Gulf of Maine supply poorly buffered waters. It's cold, but there are temperature fluctuations as well. There are strong seasonal productivity and changes with that over time. There's mixed layer dynamics and nutrient loading. So those are some of the things that are kind of really setting the NECAN region maybe apart from some of the others. And recently, kind of within the last month, the special issue of Oceanography came out, and there's a fantastic publication in there that Dwight Gledhill took the charge on, and there's again another collaborative effort based on a lot of the work that has been done. And it really, part of what it did was look at the various different regimes that are there within the NECAN area that kind of goes up onto the Scotian shelf, as you can see here, off Nova Scotia, and down into the mid-Atlantic bight, and includes Long Island Sound, which isn't covered in this figure because it wasn't able to be resolved by satellites. So this is looking at the mean monthly minimum aragonite saturation state. This is the piece that is important for shell-forming organisms. Anything above 1, it's thermodynamically possible to, in theory, put down shell or to make carbonate shells. Below 1, it, in theory, dissolves. You can see there are a number of places, especially in the coastal waters, that have very low aragonite saturation states, and that's primarily because of the input of fresh water into these places. You can also see that there are lower saturation states towards the north in the colder water, and it gets slightly higher as you go further south, underlining the differences in the various different parts of the NECAN region. In the same paper, they also broke, or we also broke apart some of the seasonal variability at each of those different places. So anything with an OA in here is one where ocean acidification is thought to be more important. Anything here with a CA is where coastal acidification is thought to be important too. The total change in the saturation state is shown in the blue line here. And then you can see the contributions of a number of different other processes, such as biological activity here with the green line, mixing in the red line, and mixing, sorry, in the light blue line, solubility in the red line, and then air-sea flux in the black line. So it's not uniform all over the region, so we need to think of this as we go forward as to how to better understand the changes in each of these regions. And so we've also seen seasonal variability, and this is some actual measurements here of the pH of seawater at the Isle of Shoals station, and looking at that over the last few years. So the other piece then is that it is not just what's going on offshore. We have also have the effect of rivers here. There are a number of large rivers, including the Kennebec River here in Maine. And this is a figure that was put together for the paper where you can see the mapped aragonite saturation state that is dominated here by the effects of the output from the Kennebec River. You can also see that over time that the pH in a number of estuaries is decreasing over time, such as this information here from the Chesapeake Bay since the 1950s. So we're seeing this offshore, we're seeing this inshore, we're seeing it as part of what is going on with the output of fresh water. And the output of fresh water in the northeast is really increasing. We have seen a 70% increase in the number of in the amount of precipitation going on in the north up here over the last few years. And you know, 4 of the 8 wettest years in a century have been since 2005. So that's something that is predicted to continue, and something that we're going to have to continue to think about as we move forward. So in the northeast, part of what we have looked at, and part of what is covered in the paper that Dwight led us on, is why this is important. And this is important because we have a large fishery up here in the northeast, and a lot of it is dependent on some of these calcifying organisms, such as lobster and scallop really form the majority of the organisms up here that are of commercial value. You can see here, this is the value of each of these different fisheries over time, and we've got to a point now where lobster and sea scallops are dominating the fishery up here. So just to kind of reinforce that, the Atlantic sea scallop supports the highest value commercial fishery in New England, with over $550 million a year being landed up in the New England region. So vitally important for New England, where the fishing industry is the oldest industry we have, established over 400 years ago by the initial settlers. So very important cultural as well as economic piece for the Northeast. And I'm not going to go through all the kind of pieces and all the evidence of what happens to the biology and species up here, but one of the things that we noticed with the State of the Science workshop is that we have a number of studies on some species, some that actually are found in the region, a lot that aren't found in the region, and looking at normally individual life stages, often looking at the larvae, which are the most vulnerable, but nothing that's or very few things that are comprehensive studies looking over the whole life cycle of an organism, or maybe multiple life cycles of the organism, and very little looking at ecosystem responses and how they would all work. So we know that there are some bad impacts of ocean and coastal acidification on marine life, with reduced shell and skeleton formation, habitat loss, less available prey and smaller fisheries, changes in behavior. So a number of different responses, often studied on the individual species scale. And there are going to be some winners and losers, and there are some pieces that we're not sure about. So mollusks, it seems that they're not going to do very well with increasing ocean acidification. It's little unclear what's going to happen to crustaceans such as the iconic lobster from New England. With some of these other pieces, we're not so sure about what's going to happen, and whether there will be bad effects for phytoplankton. It seems that there may be some good effects for macrophytes, but there are very few studies up in this region, and then very little information about kind of the whole ecosystem scale and trophic interactions. So definitely some areas for research that have been identified. So this is the article in oceanography that I was talking about. It's available online. So please, if you want to know more about what's going on up in the NECAN region and some of those gaps in our knowledge, please go and read that. There's some supplemental materials online, and we're actually also working to flesh those out into more of a technical document that will fully capture the knowledge that we gained from the webinars, the state of the science, and what we've learned since then as well. And if you were to Google some semblance of the title and put in NECAN and NERACOOS as well, or go to the NECAN and NERACOOS website, you can get a reprint of this or a PDF of this in a number of different ways. So that's kind of really reviewing and assessing and synthesizing the information. The other piece that we're doing is communicating and translating that. And what we did one day, Cassie and I sat down and took all of the information we'd been pulling together for the article for oceanography and stuff that we'd heard throughout the webinar series, and came up with this concept map, which really does show that it is very complicated and there are a number of different things that you need to think about. What you can do though is put those down into kind of big bins, which is what these are. So there's the global phenomenon of ocean acidification. There's coastal acidification and some exacerbating processes. There's variability, both spatial and temporal, and we saw that with some of the figures earlier on. And then there's the impacts to both biology and socio-economic impacts. It's still kind of complicated. You could actually boil this down even further to get something that is more simple to think about. So we have global acidification, we have local processes that are affecting coastal and ocean acidification. These have biological impacts that are which are exacerbated by other stresses. These have socio-economic impacts, but there are things that we can do. We can decrease the amount of nutrient loading into our local systems. We can decrease our impact or our footprint on the global carbon system, and we can help inform our policymakers to make the right decisions on both of these things as we move forward. So this is a simplified version that really does show that there is feedback. It isn't just that there's nothing that we can do. There are things that we can do, especially in the coastal environments where our individual actions and community actions can make a difference. So there's a lot of pieces here, and we've tried to boil it down, and others have tried to boil it down to really get at the the key parts so that we can understand what's going on and best communicate that with people. If you take the oceanography article that we were part of, that's too complicated for most people. So another important piece of what we're doing is really sitting down and talking with people whose lives are directly determined by, and livelihoods are directly determined by what goes on in the coastal ocean. So it's really to learn from fishermen, aquaculturists, coastal water quality groups about what they see and are hearing and thinking about for ocean and coastal acidification. And I like the graphic that we have for NECAN that you can see here, because it really does get into the fact that it is a group of different organizations that are really working to address this situation. So we've had a number of stakeholder engagement workshops. We've completed the ones in Maine, the South Shore of Massachusetts, in Rhode Island, and I think it was just last week in the North Shore of Massachusetts. So we're hoping that, well, we are expecting a summary out of those. We're also planning workshops in Connecticut and Canada. We're starting conversations about New Hampshire, and there's also talk about one and some planning going on for some in New York and New Jersey. This was a little bit more than I think we had originally signed up for. I think when we said, yeah, we'll do NECAN, we thought we'll do a range of webinars, and we would do the State of the Science meeting, and then we'd have one stakeholder engagement workshop for the whole region. I think we quickly learned that that scale was not going to be right for us to really do what we wanted to do, which was to really talk and listen to the people in the communities who are going to be affected. So we've gone for a much more in-depth, time-consuming and costly, but these are all being done on a shoestring. These don't need to cost an awful lot of money. Especially when you've got great people volunteering their time to help with that. So we've been working with groups in the States, a lot of the sea grants, to really pull this together, as well as the coastal management programs, to really engage with the users and to really have conversations. And it's not just presenting, getting them into a room and giving them a day of PowerPoint presentations. A lot of sitting down in small groups, round tables, to really understand some of the issues for them. And I'll just go through some of these pieces now. So in Maine, the kind of maybe some of the ideas was lack of awareness, many unknowns. It's complex, especially when you're adding lots of other things into it. There was concern that kind of research efforts are disjointed, want practical solutions, and there was great potential for partnerships along long-term monitoring and many different research groups and bodies. And a lot of these have also generated some interest in the local press. So you can see Mark member of the NECAN steering committee in this picture from the article here. In South Shore, Massachusetts, some of the popular wording was do not fully understand, lack of understanding. What's the link between all the multiple stressors? What's happening with acidified mud? Kind of what are some of the mitigation solutions? Wanting to be part of collaborative research efforts, but we need some funding, and the goal to communicate the public that to inspire them to change behavior or spend money on solutions. And again, some kind of media coverage around that. In Rhode Island, there was more of a research focus here, so more research on the biota and potential impacts and acidified mud. Certainly in Maine, there was a call to have better understanding what was going on with lobsters. The multiple stressors again, translation of the science, the good science through outreach and education, and future monitoring needs to be done in targeted manner to cover gaps and continue existing monitoring. So don't have the results from the North Shore of Massachusetts, but just kind of summary so far, really need to translate the connections of ocean and coastal acidification and its context of climate change and multiple stressors, need to identify risks and make recommendations for industry groups, need more research and monitoring. There's been a call for practical guidance for monitoring efforts at a whole load of different levels. If I've got such and such, how can I actually monitor something and do something that's useful? And then this all needs to be coordinated and need to improve and expand monitoring so we're collecting high quality and long-term data. So as part of trying to understand that monitoring piece, we've also been pulling together an inventory of monitoring for ocean and coastal acidification. I know you can't really see this spreadsheet here, but I'll just zoom in on some of it. It's looking at a number of different parameters that you can measure, and of course these are the ones that are most important for understanding ocean and coastal acidification. We've also, as part of that oceanography article, translated this into somewhat of a map, which I don't really have the time to go in through here. But although it looks like there's a lot of lines and dots and everything on here, I think the conclusion from the oceanography article is that there's really not enough monitoring that's going on out there. It's not uniform everywhere. There's a lot of work going along in some places where there's a researcher who's interested and well funded to do that, a lot of work in New Hampshire. But if you look at Rhode Island, there's not much going on there. And the thing that we are finding as we go throughout all of these community engagement, stakeholder engagement workshops is we are uncovering more and more monitoring and people who are interested in that. So the piece that also needs to be emphasized is that to really understand the carbonate chemistry, you really need to look at and capture the information, at least two of those parameters over here on the right-hand side of the screen. So this not only captures the monitoring, but it also captures locations where there are laboratories doing acidification research as well. So you want to, if you would like to know more about that, please go and read the oceanography article. It's great. I reread it again this morning, and it's nice and succinct and really gets at what we've learned in terms of the state of the science, putting that together. We do have some observations that are long-term and a climate quality, and one of those is this buoy up here that is run with funding from NOAA's Ocean Acidification Program that comes through NERACOOS and goes to UNH and is a great partnership with PMEL as well. There are a number of different shore stations as well, including one that's in Casco Bay that has been funded by recently as after NECAN was established by the EPA and also at Bill Mook's sea farm up on the Damariscotta estuary. So this is a lot of work that's being coordinated by Joe Salisbury from the University of New Hampshire, and this is Joe's setup that he has, which is an equilibrator with CO2 sensors on it. That's in Bill Mook's hatchery, and he effectively calls it, or Joe's black box. So, so that's where we've got to really so far today. We've done the state of the science. We're doing and continuing the stakeholder needs. We're getting some idea on the research and monitoring requirements, and what we're working on now as we move forward is this implementation plan. To really help us with that, we are establishing working groups in a number of different pieces that are all coordinated by the steering committee. So we have a science working group that's looking at prioritization and coordination of the inventory. There's going to be citizen science and integrate new findings into outreach pieces, looking at industry, kind of potentially workshops and developing targeted tools, policy group to develop those products for policymakers, and serve on commissions, and a number of the folks on the NECAN steering committee were part of Maine's recent Ocean Acidification Commission, and the NECAN work really helped inform the report that came out of that group, because we'd already had the State of the Science workshop and the webinar. And also an outreach and education piece that is maintaining materials and developing lesson plans and providing outreach to others. So this is really just being stood up just now. It's taken us a long time to get to this, but we're looking forward to moving forward and having these groups inform our implementation plan. So if you would like some more information on NECAN, the NECAN website is hung off the NERACOOS website. You can find it up here, neracoos.org/NECAN. There's a number of different pieces there, including you can find links and to the YouTube videos of all the old webinars. And also we're now working on a resource portal as a direct feedback from what we've heard from the stakeholders. They want to be able to get out information in a way that they can understand, and they can help others to understand what is going on with ocean and coastal acidification in the Northeast. So when we sat down and initially started doing this, Beth Turner from NOAA came up with the phrase, "Yes, NECAN." So I think that really summarizes what we've done, because we have started off with really a grassroots organization with very limited funding to do all of this, and we have spent the last 2 years doing what I think is a lot of good work and having a lot of success. And you can see some of that on the left-hand side. We've got a mailing list that's got 388 members on it. They opened this much more than you would regularly find with a monthly mailing, or we had the 16 science-based webinars. We've had stakeholder workshops. People are looking at the stuff on YouTube. We've got a lot of page views, and I'm hoping that we were part of the inspiration, or part of some of the lessons learned can be transferred to SOCAN, and it's also affected legislation and action with the Maine Commission and some of the work that we're seeing in some of the other states. And so we're providing guidance on research and observations. We're generating products, or we will be. We're organizing workshops and outreach activities and providing resources for stakeholders. But we're not necessarily an organization as such. NECAN isn't an agency or institution that undertakes monitoring or research, but our members do. And we're not a source of funding, but we do help to prioritize regional research and maybe give that a good leg up in getting funding to do things. So I should say that if you want to know more about this, you can either contact me, or you can contact Cassie, who is a member of the steering committee but also the coordinator, and has done a lot of the legwork to make this all happen. And as I said, this is the NECAN story, and it's not over yet. We're still continuing to write the pages of the book, and I would like to thank NOAA's Ocean Acidification Program, NOAA's North Atlantic Regional Team, and EPA for providing us some funds for this. Also, the IU's Program Office, because NERACOOS has contributed time with money from them to do all of that, but also all of the people who helped with the publication of the oceanography article, which is all down here in very fine print, and the rest of the NECAN steering committee. Without everybody's hard work, we wouldn't have been able to do all of the good stuff we've done so far. And so, Jen, I'll hand it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ru, for walking us through the creation and evolution of NECAN. You guys have really done quite a bit in just a few years. So we do have some questions for you, and we will go ahead and open the floor for any questions from other members of our audience. Just please go ahead and type those questions or comments you have for Rue into that questions box in your control panel. So Rue, our first question is from Dennis. It's a broader scope question. Are there any countries making gains on reducing acidification?
I would say that I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question. So I would have to defer that to somebody else. Maybe Dwight could answer that if he's around, or else we can get you an answer later.
Yeah, so Dennis, we'll go ahead and follow up with you by email and get you an answer from the NECAN folks on that. So a few questions about the NECAN process itself. One question from Abby: how many people on average attended each webinar? And thanks for the wonderful presentation.
I think we had a range depending on what was going on at any particular time, but I think we had up to over 50 to down to about 20 on any one webinar.
Great, thank you.
So 25 is not a bad turnout for today.
Awesome. And Deborah Hernandez has a question about the outreach engagement efforts on NECAN. She was wondering if those outreach engagement sessions follow a standard format or agenda in the different locales.
Deborah, what we've really done over time is it's following probably 80% of a similar agenda, but it does evolve over time as we learn what works and what doesn't work. And if we could help provide an example agenda and sample kind of presentations and other things, we'd be more than happy to do that.
Thank you. There is a question about the NECAN implementation plan and how it relates, or if it relates, to the NOAA Ocean Acidification Education Implementation Plan from Danya.
I'm not 100% sure on the question because I haven't seen the later document in a while, but it will build. I think the general principle is that it will build on previous previous documents, but will really focus on a regional piece as well. So I hope that helps, but I think we'll see as we move forward how the two kind of mesh together.
Great. Another question related to outreach and engagement with stakeholders. Janine is wondering, from your experience, should we focus more on the numbers related to OA, for example, economic and ecological losses, when talking to stakeholders to get their attention?
I think that the others who've been to more of the stakeholder workshops than I might be better able to answer that, but because I've only been able to attend 2 of the 4 so far. But I think that the thing that would be my take home, and if we had others in the room, there might be an interesting discussion on that. But I think the piece is you've got to be careful with what you say. And I'm sure this makes sense to everybody else, and not paint too much of a doom and gloom scenario. That if you focus too much on some of the negative sides and pieces like that, then you might get people kind of disengaging before you've really had a chance to talk to them about what's going on and about what some of the kind of pieces are for mitigation or some of the other pieces. So really putting a case out there that is strong but is not too much doom and gloom.
Great. And Dennis is honing in a little bit. He was wondering, based on the data, have certain regions shown a decrease of acidification?
By a decrease in acidification, do you mean kind of reversing the trend that we're currently seeing now? I'm going to take it that that's the case. I don't know of any at the moment. I've certainly not that I know of up here in the northeast. But that may be because we haven't been monitoring the information for long enough. Certainly, we have seen some good things happening. We've seen, you know, even though we still have elevated nutrient loading kind of compared to pre-industrial times, we know that there are a number of estuaries where we have seen decreases in the nutrient loading over time, and presumably these must have had effects on you know, the ocean and coastal acidification in those areas. We just maybe don't have the monitoring systems in place to fully tell that story.
Great, that was what Dennis was referring to, so that's...
And I'm sure that, that there are examples of this, I just don't know of them.
Okay, great. He said, thank you again. More research and monitoring is needed. So yeah, I actually have a question for you, and it does go back to the engagement. I was wondering if you've noticed, and it's sort of similar to talking about the ecological or economic impacts, have you found actions that really resonate with certain stakeholders? You know, those actions you talked to us about. Have you found various ones that really stick in those workshops in different locales?
I would say that we're more still in the piece of, or in the mode of exploring some of those actions or the possibilities of what they are, and not really, you know, not really understanding whether they stick or whether they kind of people implement them, or so really haven't had the ability to follow up and see if there've been any changes in behavior since the workshops.
Great. I mean, are the actions you're asking the ones you mentioned to us, sort of you're really focusing on the nutrients and reducing carbon footprints as individuals? Are those the ones that get thrown out there?
Well, we're not necessarily asking, but we're just saying these are some of the things that can be done.
Okay, awesome. Great. So if anyone else has any lingering questions, we'll throw a few more out there. There is a question that has come in from Danya. If there was any talk of an ocean acidification educational needs assessment, yeah.
Sorry, Jen, was that a question?
It was. She was wondering if there's any talk of an ocean acidification educational needs assessment. And I know I can speak to this a little bit if you...
Go for it.
Yeah. So the NOAA Ocean Acidification Program, in conjunction with the NOAA National Marine Sanctuaries, did just get funded to begin that process of conducting and just that. So it seems like we're on the same page, and if you are interested, feel free to contact me. And of course, folks like NECAN and their outreach efforts will be part of that. So, yeah.
Yes, I mean, there may be some input to that from what Cassie's doing right now, which is, you know, there's a session down at NMEA that is all about ocean and coastal acidification, and I'm sure there'll be some good output of that could be input into that discussion.
Great. Awesome. So there's one more question. Who, and I know you mentioned that you'd only been to a few of the stakeholder workshops, but do you have a sense of who comes to those? Or can you give us, some examples of who may show up or who's invited? And yeah.
Well, the thing we've been doing really is working with the local Sea Grant and other kind of extension like people in the States to really use their in-depth knowledge of the communities and their relationships that they've already established to really try and get at the people that are affected. So we have had, in Maine, there were lobstermen there. There were industry folks from the aquaculture side and hatchery side. There were clammers there. So it is a range of different people. There were water quality monitoring groups that were there. So really people who are involved in the states and using the the local contacts to really identify and target who is invited. We often actually, certainly for the first couple, were limited in space by the places that we had available to us. So we had to be very targeted with who we invited to make sure that we got those people who often don't traditionally come to these things, but certainly it's relying on those local relationships to try and get people to come and interact, because those are the people who ultimately are going to be the most affected by this.
Great, thank you. We will see if there are any other questions for Rue. Please go ahead and type any final questions you have for our speaker into the questions box. And let's see if there's any other that are out there already. There is one just related to, you mentioned the riverine input and how you see that decrease in aragonite saturation state. And you may have touched on this, but do you know what that is driven by, that what in that fresh water is driving saturation state down?
There's decreased buffering in some of that fresh water that's coming in. If you want a better understanding of what's going on, I would refer you to the oceanography article that has a nice summary in a lot of these different pieces. There's also, in the northeast, there's water coming down from the north over the Scotian Shelf water that is causing similar issues. But there's some nice summaries in that oceanography article. I would recommend everybody. It's a good piece of reading.
Great, and that link for everyone should be in your questions box, the direct link to that special issue of oceanography focused on ocean acidification. We do have another question. Deborah is wondering, will you develop a monitoring plan, or has there been discussion of developing a monitoring plan for ocean acidification in the Northeast or in your region?
That will probably be one of the recommendations to come out of, to be in the implementation plan. So the implementation plan is going to be more high level, but would probably point to this. I'd need to go and check with everybody else. I can't remember if that's exactly where we are. But yes, that is part of what we want to do. We want to come up with a monitoring plan. And as one of the first steps towards that, with some funding the EPA has, they're actually devoting staff time to developing this practical monitoring guidance document for the region, based on some efforts that went on out on the West Coast, but really trying to turn it into something so that if you want to go out and monitor OA, you can actually find out really practical guidance on how to do that makes sense to most people. But yeah, there will be. The idea for the implementation plan is to lay out not only monitoring needs, but also research needs on the kind of biology and the socioeconomic impacts as well.
All right, great. Well, I think we have answered all of the questions that are there for now. And just for those who have questions that may pop up right after the webinar is ended, both Rue's contact and Cassie's contact information are in the questions box. So you can find their emails there. So feel free to follow up with them if anything does come up or you have curiosities about the NECAN effort. And so I just want to thank Rue again for that really fantastic presentation and really great dialogue as well. Really sparked a lot of great discussion. So as we wrap up, we do just want to let folks know that if you are interested in learning more about the Southeast Ocean and Coastal Acidification Network, a great way to do that is by joining the SOCAN listserv, and you can do that right here in the URL shown on your screen now. The SOCAN website is hosted under the Southeast Regional IUCE Association, similar to what Rue described in the Northeast. And yeah, please direct any questions about the effort in the Southeast to this email address, socan@socorro.org as well. And we do want to thank you all for attending the SOCAN State of the Science webinar today. We do always welcome feedback, further questions, or suggestions for topics for this webinar series. And you can submit that input or thoughts by simply replying to the follow-up email you'll receive tomorrow after this webinar. And as was mentioned, we did record this webinar, and the recording along with a PDF of the presentation will be available on the SOCAN website, this URL at the bottom of the screen now. And with that, we do have our next State of the Science discussion, and it will actually continue on a similar theme. 2 weeks from today, on Tuesday, July 14th, Deborah Hernandez, Director of the Southeast Coastal Ocean Observing Regional Association, and Libby Jewett, Director of the NOAA Ocean Acidification Program, will discuss leveraging the IUCE regional associations to achieve ocean acidification goals. And how the Socorro and OAP partnership has evolved in the South Atlantic. And that is at 12 p.m. So we hope you will join us. And thanks again, Rue, for a very informative presentation. Really great to hear that story, and looking forward to seeing how that story continues to unfold. Thank you all for your thoughtful questions and taking the time to join us.